All right, guys, welcome to the Sunday edition of the Mac Forum video chat. This is for March 8th, 2015. I want to welcome everyone. I hope that you enjoy the show this evening. It's maybe a little bit shorter than it has been the last couple of weeks. Just a few tips this time. Didn't get as much research in as I have in the past sometimes. But I hope you'll find the things that I did put in a little interesting. Let's go ahead and proceed with the kind of a forum overview here. At the moment, we have a total of 285,006 threads, comprising 1,565,583 posts. And those posts have been contributed by a total of 293,568 members. The newest member is Winnie Holb. My apologies if I mispronounce that. Sometimes some of the member names are a little difficult to figure out the pronunciation. Hope that you are enjoying your time here in the forum. If you are a new member, and you have not introduced yourself, take a poke around the forum. There's a welcome thread where you can kind of introduce yourself to the membership, and we can say welcome to you, extend hold out the welcome mat, so to speak, and we certainly look forward to hearing from you. If you're completely new to the Mac, this is a good place to be. And if you're wondering about being able to answer questions, no matter how new you are, chances are within a short amount of time you'll be answering questions because you know something that somebody else doesn't know. We have a lot of members who make who either partially or completely have made the transition to Windows, away from Windows to the Mac. And you find with those folks that sometimes one of our other members will have a Windows question that they can answer, and so it's always a real helpful thing to have people from a variety of different backgrounds and abilities there. Try to get the camera adjusted there a little bit. Not that you need a better look at my ugly face, but the lighting seems to be a little weird this evening. Let's go ahead and dive right into some of the Apple news. The Apple will be hosting a Spring Forward event tomorrow, and they are expected to unveil some additional details about the Apple Watch, including possibly battery life estimates, proposed launch date, and more about pricing. And there's also some speculation that the Apple may also use the event to unveil a 12-inch Retina MacBook Air and/or a refreshed 11 and 13-inch models in the MacBook Air line. As always, when these kinds of events are coming, I always recommend caution as to what's being expected. Sometimes the speculation is correct, sometimes it's not. When it comes to the new machines, a refresh of those models wouldn't necessarily surprise me, but I'm not holding my breath either. It's one of those things where Apple tends to keep these kinds of things close to the vest. As far as the Apple iWatch, or whatever you want to call it, the Apple Watch, I've heard it called both things on the internet. It would not surprise me if we don't hear more along that line tomorrow at the event tomorrow. That's something that has been brewing for a while. The initial speculation about release date in some areas suggested that it would be in the spring. So we're approaching that time. So it would not surprise me at all if they announce some more details relative to the rollout of that particular item. For me, from what I've seen as what the speculation about the projected prices, it may be a little out of my budget. It's not hideously expensive compared to other top quality watches. The question would be for a lot of people, is it going to do something for me that I can't do with the phone, with the iPhone, or with a similar smartphone? I think we're only going to know that as we get closer to the actual release and people get it in their hands, get a true hands-on and get to experiment with it. That's one of the problems with wearable technology. I think more than anything in the wearable technology sector, a lot of whether something is going to be successful is going to depend on how you carry it out. And I'll have some more thoughts about that a little bit later in the show. Not that I am the best example of that, but it's something that you might have in mind. So we'll talk about that toward the end of the show, kind of in the comment section. Excuse me. Also, this week, a couple of other things that came out this week. Microsoft has released a version of a preview version, so to speak, of their Microsoft Office 2016 for the Mac. I've downloaded it, but at this point, I haven't. I didn't get an opportunity to download it until yesterday, so I really have not played with it a great deal yet. Really, as a matter of fact, I'm in terms of launching it. That's about all I've been able to do is get it installed. Haven't really put any of it through its paces. It looks like, from what I've read about it, in addition to the new versions of Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, you have some Retina optimized interfaces, a few new features, and much like the Office 365 bundle, I think it's heavily shifted toward collaboration, working in collaborative types of environments. I think that's going to be a big deal. It certainly looks to be the way that they are going with that project. Office 2016 for the Mac is going to be free for right now to all users, Mac users, but you have to be running Yosemite during the preview period. And right now, it looks like, from what I downloaded yesterday, the previews will work until the new preview release is completed, and then that version will stop working, and then you move to the next preview. It looks like they are shooting for roughly 60 days between preview builds. I would imagine that if they have a huge number of problems in a particular build, they would go a little bit quicker with the builds. But what it looks like now is they're shooting for something on the order of 60 days. The project is scheduled for final release sometime later this year, which is why it's called Office 2016 and not Office 2015. So that explains part of that. Also this week, one of the other things that came up is the public beta of Yosemite version 10.10.3. This is the third point release in the Yosemite series. And it looks like I've downloaded it yesterday. I played with it just a little bit. I'm running it at the moment, and things seem to be working okay. I haven't noticed any major glitches at this point. This preview, in fact, really, I haven't experienced any glitches, but I haven't hit it with any serious issues at the moment. Yosemite, this particular preview also includes beta of the Photos app. You remember Apple talked about this at that noise you hear in the background was Siri on my iPhone kicking in, telling me about a web search that it found related to what we're talking about. But anyway, what we're seeing with the Photos app, that's part of the beta. You remember Apple talked about this last year, and that seems to be the app that is going to take the place of iPhoto. I know there are many people who will be glad to see that coming. I haven't really played with it yet. Once again, I just got it on there yesterday, ran through a couple of my photos with it. I like the interface, but that's maybe because it reminds me of a couple of plugins that I was already using. I think it's going to be interesting to see what becomes of it. It may be a while. The final release on Photos has not been scheduled yet, as far as I know. That hasn't been announced. Perhaps we will hear a little more about that tomorrow. And I haven't seen a timetable for when this version, this 10.10.3, goes live and comes out of beta. That's probably going to depend in part on what bugs are found and how quickly they can be squashed. For me, it's been okay, and I have not had a lot of issues with it. All right, let's move on down and around to some of the tips for the week. Only a couple this week. Last week I had several, and this week not quite as many perhaps. I had one or two more, and I kind of lost the references to them. I may add them to the show notes if I can find them quickly enough after this evening's show. Couple of things I want to be sure that I mention to you. One of them is a tip that I forgot. A friend of mine who I used to meet and work with regularly on another forum pointed this out to me some time ago, and it still works under Yosemite. I had forgotten about this, and since I've started actually putting together show notes and kind of a rundown sheet, I've started using this again. macOS 10 has a feature, a service that lets you quickly summarize something in just a few seconds. What happens basically is, let's say you've got a block of text from a website or a Microsoft Word document, anything like that. You select the text that you want summarized, and then go into the Apple menu, or go into the menu for the program that you're using. In my case right now would be Safari. And look under that menu where it says Safari, and scroll down until you see Services. And in the Services menu, you're going to look for a service that says Summarize. Okay? Now, what that's going to do is it's going to take the text that you've selected, paste it into a window, and you then, based on the options that come up in that window, you can tell it whether you want to summarize in terms of sentences or in terms of paragraphs, and you can control the level of detail. As you slide to the left, The summary is less detailed. As you slide the slider to the right, you will see more of the original article text. So the farther right you go, the closer you are to having all of the original text. You can take that summary and copy and paste it into another application, anything like that. And that's come in real handy for me today as I've put those, as I've started putting the show notes together. Okay, if you don't see this service in your services list, here's why. And I just checked this in the beta earlier, and it's still available and it's still functioning. What you need to do is go into services preference, go to services, which is going to be in that Safari menu or Chrome or Mail, whatever you have open. Click there, scroll down to services, and pick the one that says services preferences, and you're going to go scroll down and check summarize. Make sure that that one is checked. The other way to get to this is to go to your system preferences, go to the keyboard preference pane, select the services option that's there, and scroll down until you see summarize, and make sure that option is checked. Then from then on, whenever you select some stuff and right click, services will this option will be in the services menu, and you can choose it and summarize the information. I probably didn't do a good job explaining that, but I'll have a link in the show notes that shows you how to enable it. I do want to say one thing you need to be aware of. If you are using some of these features like DevonThink, for example, and I believe Evernote may have the same function where they have a summarize function that appears in services, make sure that you pick the one you want. The first 2 or 3 times I tried this afternoon, I couldn't figure out why I wasn't getting the OS 10 version of the service that kept popping up in DevonThink, and it was because I was choosing the wrong one. The two are right close together in the services menu, and I was choosing the wrong one. So you want to make sure that you have the right one available to you. You can have both of them available. That's not a conflict. You just have to make sure that you choose the correct one in that list. And as I say, it's a good service to use. I like it. Excuse me. I like it. One thing I have to say about it that I kind of like. Let's suppose you're doing something like the rundown for this show, and you've settled on a level of summary that works for most of your workflow. In other words, this is a level of summary that you use most of the time. It retains that setting for complexity. You can obviously adjust it when that window pops up. But if you find that you prefer to retain more of the original text or less of the original text, depending on what you need most often, that option gets preserved from one use to the next, apparently. So that's a handy thing to have around. Okay, and the next couple of tips, I didn't have an iOS tip this week. There was nothing earth-shaking that caught my attention, if you will, for lack of a better word. But I do have a couple more Yosemite tips for you. One of them has to do with the installation of Yosemite and the use of File Vault. Remember, Rod Sprague has posted some information in a thread concerning File Vault 2 and some issues that some Mac users were having with File Vault 2 and whether it's on by default now under OS 10, under Yosemite. And there's been some back and forth about this on the internet. I will say, when you are installing Yosemite, Pay attention to the options, because it appears that at least some people are seeing where it appears that File Vault is on by default, and that's not. In the past, it's been off by default. What I want to be sure and mention to you, the reason I think you should pay attention. I know initially with File Vault, the first incarnation of File Vault, and now to a lesser extent File Vault 2, we've seen on the forum and in various other online communities, number of users reporting problems with File Vault, not decrypting the archive correctly, not decrypting the encrypted file correctly. For those of you that are not familiar with it, File Vault is basically a security feature that, when it's turned on, will encrypt the data on your hard drive, which sounds like a great idea, especially if your Mac gets stolen. The problem initially with the first incarnation of File Vault is that a lot of users reported problems with it. I'm willing to concede that some of it might have been users not truly understanding how it worked, and also not necessarily understanding that when you encrypt something using File Vault, you've got to remember that password setting. You don't have a lot of options if you forget the password. But one thing that seems to be an issue, I'm still chasing this one down a little bit more, but one thing that seems to be an issue, and might explain why some people are having more of an issue with File Vault than others. File Vault needs space to decrypt the files that it's encrypted. And so if you have a hard drive that's getting a little bit low on space, File Vault may have a problem in having enough space to decrypt the files that it needs to open. So, and you know, those of you that have been around the forum for a while, you know that many of our members recommend keeping something on the order of 15 to 20% space free on your drive, just to keep OS X operating smoothly and happily. Well, then you couple that with a need for space for File Vault, and I think it would be very easy for the space needs to creep up on somebody, for them not to realize that they may be getting low on space. You do need a good degree of space to make File Vault able to do the decryption properly. For myself, I would think that it would be more beneficial to perhaps store files that need to be encrypted in an encrypted disk image. Once again, though, be sure that you remember the passwords for those, because there's not a heck of a lot you can do in most cases to open the file if you forget the password. I had the unfortunate mistake once of putting a password protecting, the file wasn't encrypted, password protecting a Microsoft Word file. Did the password one night at home while I was working. Took it to work the next morning, tried to enter the password, and apparently I had forgotten the password because I couldn't get in, didn't have time to run through one of the Windows password recovery utilities for Word, and ended up basically recreating the entire document because of not being able to get past the password. So File Vault, although it's a great idea, you do need to do your homework before you enable it. So my suggestion to you, if you encounter that when you're installing Yosemite, would be to turn it off until you've done your homework and decide if it's going to meet your needs and what's best for you. I understand people's concern about privacy, but there are some headaches and other issues that you really need to be aware of when you're running FileVault. And then the other Yosemite-related tip is not just applicable to Yosemite. I thought I had included this last week, so it might accidentally sneak in 2 shows in a row. I didn't see it in my notes from last week, but it might actually sneak in 2 shows in a row, but that's okay. As most of you know, with the changes from what used to be called software update in 10.6 and going to the present system of updating through the App Store, one of the things that can happen is when there are updates available, not only do you see the badge, the little red badge in your dock, but you also can see a notification that pops up in Notification Center. And for some users, this is kind of annoying because it means that if you ignore an update, let's say that you don't want to update the OS right now, if you ignore an update, then one of the things that can happen is that update will keep popping up periodically and basically nagging you until you do something about it. Now, there are a couple ways to get rid of the update, get rid of this nag. The first one, of course, is to go ahead and update the software in question, whether it be Yosemite, whether it be some other third-party app. The first way to get rid of that notification is to go ahead and run the update. But let's assume for a moment that for whatever reason, you don't want to run the update. Okay, you don't want that update right now, you don't have time, whatever the reason might be. There is a way to silence these notifications. I'm going to look down in my notes here just to make sure I have this right. The first thing you want to do when you get one of these notifications and you realize that it keeps popping up, because if you just hit ignore, it's going to pop up again. If you want to stop this from happening, here's one thing that you can do. It works with the Yosemite updates and is going to work with most other app updates that come through the App Store. Here's what you do. Go ahead and open up the App Store, just as you would, and make sure that you're logged into your account, and click on the Updates tab. What you're going to see there is you're going to see the apps that you've installed recently, but you will also see at the top of the list whatever pending updates you have. In other words, updates that have been announced, the notification's been pushed down to you, but you haven't installed them yet. Here's how to make that go away. You open it, once you're in the Updates tab, right-click or control-click on the banner that you want to get rid of, the update that you want to get rid of. And then you choose Hide Update. Okay, so you're going to right-click on whatever it is. Let's just assume that it's for Yosemite, and you want that to go away. You don't want to install right now. You don't want to install Yosemite right now. So you would go into the App Store, make sure that you're logged into your account, click on the Updates tab, and then you would right-click or control-click if you're not using a multi-button mouse, and choose Hide Update. And that will hide that update. The article that I saw mentioned it specifically as it applies to OS 10 updates, but it should also work for many other third-party applications. Now, here's the catch. It applies to that update. It's not permanent in the sense that, let's suppose that next week Apple releases 10.10.3. You get that update and you hide it. Whenever 10.10.4 were to come out, that update, even though the other one is hidden, you would get a notification about 10.10.4, and you have to go into the App Store again and cancel that update. So what you would see is it's specific to the update that you're being offered. So as the point number changes, you would get a new notification and you have to go back and repeat the process. But at least it cuts down so that you're not seeing it every day or every week. I'll have an article, a link in the show notes to that article. It seems like it works for a lot of other apps from what I've seen in the comments that I've read thus far. It should work with a lot of the other things that come through the App Store. Now, there are still going to be some apps that you have installed in your system that notify you through their own check for updates setup. Apps, for example, that didn't come from the App Store. You'll have to deal with those individually, obviously. But this is a good way to get rid of the ones that are coming from the App Store. So that's a handy thing to have around. All right, guys, that's going to do it for the tips. And I promise you I'd take just a minute and talk for a little bit about something that I've been a little puzzled by. Well, puzzle's not quite the right word. It has to do with the idea of wearable computers. And I was talking with somebody about this a while back when Google Glass was being talked about. When some of the initial prototypes of Google Glass were being talked about. I think the success or failure of wearable technology is going to depend quite heavily on how seamlessly you're able to integrate that into someone's personal life. And the best example of this I can think of is the following. It comes from, I believe the author's name was Paul Goldenberg, about technology. And if I can find the name of the book, I'll point you to it. But I'm having a little trouble remembering it at the moment. But the gist of the comment was as follows. You wanted a technology to be, there were certain kinds of technology that you almost needed to be like glasses. Okay, and for example, here's what I mean. When you buy a pair of glasses, it really takes very little, quote unquote, training to show you how to use them. In the sense that, you know, yes, you have to clean them, but it's not a bunch of highly specialized training. Whereas, for example, with contact lenses, that takes a little more training, and then other technologies, of course, take far more in the way of training. I think in order to be really successful, particularly in the initial phases, wearable technology, like the Google Glass and the watches and these kinds of things, are going to have to be something that people can pick up and use almost immediately with very little in the way of training. And it's going to take some people in society a little bit of time to get used to the this creeps me out factor kind of thing. And I read some of the initial comments about you know, Google Glass and what people's reaction to it were. Some people obviously loved it and thought it was a great idea, and okay, this is great. And other people were a little creeped out because they didn't necessarily always know if the person they were looking at was recording them, and they didn't like it. Even if they weren't doing anything out of the ordinary, they just didn't like the idea that they might be on camera. So the notion that some people have that says, oh, if you're not doing anything wrong, don't worry about it. That's not the way a lot of people's minds work. They seem to be of the opinion that, hey, whether I'm doing something or not is irrelevant. I don't want to be recorded. And that's just one example of recorded. There are a number of other wearable, I mean, granted, there are some benefits to wearable technology. being able to, for example, have a look around and being able to look up information kind of as needed, which you can do to some extent with a phone now, but being able to have, say, a watch, for example, read your pulse rate as you're exercising, this, that, and the other. Those are things that people might want. Some of the other things are things that people might not want. So you're gonna have a period of time there where it's gonna take people a little getting used to, and a large portion of how you get things done and whether you succeed is going to be dependent on two things. One, do you have the time to let the market develop? The classic example that I would have of that would be the Sony Walkman or the videotape recorder. In the early days of the video recorder, there were, there were not a lot of blank tapes. People were not convinced of the need. Why did they need to spend such an amount of money on a VCR and an inordinate amount of money on a tape to play back? And then at some point, people's perceptions started to shift, and you started to see people doing things like recording their favorite soap operas and other types of TV shows. So the initial pioneers in that industry kind of had to wait a little bit for the users to catch up and see the need for a device, or better yet, to make people want a device. There seem to be two ways to make a lot of money, not only in tech industry, but in other things. Hey, you can either create a device that people want to use, or you create a device that people need. And one of the advantages of creating something that somebody wants to use is they'll bend over backwards finding excuses for how to, why they need it and how it's going to make their lives better. They'll do your marketing for you. And I think that's, to some extent, what you see with things like wearable technology. Can you create something that integrates as seamlessly as possible into people's lives? And can you afford to wait while the market develops and people get comfortable? Some companies are going to be able to do that. Some of them aren't. So I think that's going to have a lot to do with it. Apple obviously is positioned to a point from financially where they can wait. I don't think they're going to have to wait long. There's a lot of name and brand recognition that goes there, but we may be at a point where people are ready for it, depending on how you do it. A smart watch, they might be ready for. The smart glasses, as hallmarked by your like Google Glass, they may not be ready for that yet. I'm certainly not a marketing genius, but I've talked to a number of people that have basically said the concept of the Google Glass situation kind of creeped them out a little bit in ways that the smart watch doesn't. So that's a good example of what we're looking at right now. I'm hoping that event tomorrow turns out kind of interesting. I don't expect them to announce that they're giving me free gear, but hey, if somebody in Cupertino is listening and they want to rain something, down my direction, so be it. I'm not expecting that, by the way. Not holding my breath there. And that's going to just about do it for this week's show. As I say, we did not have quite as many things in the way of tips this week as we've had in the last couple of weeks. Next week, we should get back on schedule with a number of things that are back, that are larger number of tips. Excuse me for drawing a blank there for a second. And as a bonus tip, I'll post this one because I didn't have time to look it up before the show. I thought of this right before the show, and I did not have time to to double check the key sequence to do it. Most of you know that on a lot of the Apple computer systems, whether you're using an external keyboard or the built-in keyboard on, say, a Mac Pro, you have volume up and volume down keys. When you push volume up, for example, the volume goes up by a specified increment. Each push brings the volume up by a specified increment. Well, there is a way by pushing a key, by holding a key at the same time, to have your volume go up in smaller increments, up or down in smaller increments. So push the key and go up, and it goes up in a smaller increment than it would if you just punched the volume up button. Same works for volume down. And it also, if I remember correctly, affects brightness. So let's say you're adjusting the brightness on your monitor, brightness and contrast settings on your monitor, and you need a smaller adjustment than you can get just by pushing the brightness and contrast keys. You hold down this key while you're pushing brightness or contrast, and it affects those as well. So I did not remember the hotkey that you have to push at the same time. So I'll look that up. It should only take me a few minutes, and I'll post that in the show notes kind of as a bonus tip for your putting up with a shorter than usual show this evening. That's going to just about do it for this week, folks. I hope that you found this helpful. I'm looking forward to the event tomorrow just to see what's going to happen. I'm not expecting earth-shaking kinds of announcements. Even if they were to announce an Apple Watch tomorrow, I would not be first in line to buy one, not because I have anything against it. It's just I'm just not in the habit of wearing a watch anymore. I'd have to think twice about buying one. So just keep that in mind, folks. Keep an eye out in the coming weeks. I'll have links to all the show information this evening. And as I said, I hope that you've enjoyed this show. This has been your host, Sly Dude, for this week's show. And I'm glad that you were able to join us. And I will see you next week on the weekly Mac Forum video chat. And be sure to check the sticky thread in the forum, in the community announcement area of the forum. And that will alert you to any show-related changes that come up during the week. Until next week, this has been your host, Sly Dude. I've enjoyed having you here, and I will see you in the forums.